I are going to cover is the basics and the ins and outs on how to homeschool your child. Now, we'll touch a little bit on how to do it, like with the subject matter, but this is more so on the legal steps that you, as your child's parent, need to take for you to homeschool your child. Now, we decided to do this webinar because a lot of parents in New York State are electing to homeschool their children. Now, as education attorneys, we felt it was appropriate to explain this option to parents who are considering it. So, Taylor, we're going to go to the next slide. Thank you. So, first, what is homeschooling? There's the homeschooling terminology has a lot of different meanings and it means something different to each person you ask. But regardless, you as parents of children in New York State have the legal right to homeschool your child. You have the legal right to do it. Whether you want to do it is ultimately up to you. Whether it fits your schedule is ultimately up to you. Regardless, you have the legal right to do it. Now, homeschooling is just formal instruction of your child that takes place in your home or another private setting. That's what gets people tripped up. It doesn't necessarily mean that you are actually teaching your child inside of your home. Your child can be going to the library and receive the education there. You can have another private facility that you decide to go to. But ultimately, it's education that's not in the classroom. And it's most of the time always done by the child's parent. It could be grandma, maybe grandma's been a teacher for 30 years, grandpa's been a teacher for 30 years, someone's aunt, uncle, they're retired, but they've been teachers. We have clients who it's their grandparents who are homeschooling their children. Why? Because grandma's was a general education teacher for 30 years. So you want to tap into your network to see who exactly can do it. But it's always almost done by the child's family or through private tutors. That's the thing that most people don't consider. You don't necessarily have to be the one to teach your child when your child is homeschooled. You can have, again, a family member do it, or you can have a private tutor be the one to homeschool your child. Now, it is appropriate for students who are struggling in conventional school settings. When students with varying disabilities or when the parents want to and are able to develop a child-centered curriculum and teach it to their child. So if your child is in a general education classroom setting or in a special education classroom setting, and you still feel that your child is struggling, homeschooling might be the best option. But before you elect to homeschool your child, you owe it to yourself and you owe it to your child to consider all of your options. There can be maybe a BOCES program if you're located in the city. Maybe there's a specialized school that is perfect for your child. Maybe the school district has another school that is perfect for your child. But if none of that seems to fit what your child needs, you have to consider homeschooling. You owe it to your child. As I always tell this to my clients, Sivan and Taylor are tired of hearing this. I say this a million times. Parents are the experts on your children. If you ask me, the parents have PhDs in their children. Nobody knows their child better than their parents do. If you feel deep down inside that your child needs that specialized, continuous, one-on-one setting that only a homeschool setting can provide, you have to consider it. Now, what are some reasons that you would consider to homeschool your child? The first, and this is probably the most common, is that your child is avoidant and seems unwilling to attend school physically. This is common with children who are diagnosed with depression, diagnosed with anxiety, diagnosed with PTSD, or diagnosed with mood disorders. These children with these medical conditions oftentimes just refuse to go to school. Now, even though your child's refusing to go to school, your child still needs an education. That's when homeschooling would come into play. Or your child has a learning disability and you want to provide the educational experience catered to your child's learning style. This often comes up with children who are diagnosed on the spectrum, where there are literally no schools that are appropriate for that specific child. I often seen parents take on the role of homeschooling their children. Or if you have children with a very unique medical condition that literally no school around you can accommodate. There might be, let's say you live in Buffalo, there might be a school in Manhattan, but you don't want to send your kid away to school, so you would elect to homeschool your child. So it's either when your child has some mood disorder or anxiety, depression, PTSD, and they're refusing, or your child has a very unique medical condition that literally no school around you can accommodate. Or your child is simply having a negative experience at school and you want to protect your child from those influences. Maybe the children in your child's home school district are bullying your child. Maybe the children around you are just setting bad examples. And maybe you cannot afford the tuition in a neighboring school district. Maybe you cannot afford the tuition at a private school. Homeschooling would be a good option. I often also I oftentimes see parents elect to homeschool their children for religious reasons. If you have a specific religious belief and there are no schools in your area that are catered towards your religious belief, you may want to homeschool your child to not only provide them the education, but also to ensure that they are receiving the religious teachings that you want your child to receive. This is often seen in families in upstate New York. In the city and in downstate, like below Poughkeepsie, there are a lot of religious schools, but when you get further north in New York State, there are very little. So it's often the child simply refuses, your child has a very specific disability, your child's having negative experiences, or you have a religious reason why you'd like to pull your child from the school. Now, Taylor, we're going to move on. Now, uh, there are two types of homeschooling. There is homeschooling and there is homebound instruction. You may say, Nick, those mean the same thing. I would say, no, no, no. They are very different. Homebound instruction is an educational service provided by the school district to students that are enrolled in the district. They're enrolled in the district, but are unable to attend school in person for an extended period of time. So, if your child is enrolled in the district, but your child is unable to go to school in the district, you may be eligible for homebound instruction. For example, if your child suffered a broken bone and is unable to walk or navigate a school building for the period of which your child's going to be injured, that would be homebound instruction. What's an example? When I was in eighth grade, I broke my ankle. I received homebound instruction for 2 months. It was the greatest time of my life. I woke up in my pajamas, rolled out of bed, quite literally, and I went downstairs and I got my homebound instruction. There was a time where I was actually late. I was the only student in New York State to be late to homebound instructions. And to this day, my dad has not let me forget that. But that's an example of homebound instruction. When your child is still a student in the district, but the district provides you the education at your home. Or, as discussed before, your child has an emotional disability or a mental illness, such as depression or school avoidance, that prevents them from being able to physically enter the school building. Oftentimes in 504 plans, the district would recommend homebound instruction to allow your student to remain enrolled in the district, but get their education at home. Now, when this happens, the school district will send teachers or tutors to your home to provide you the same instruction as if it was given to your in school peers. Now, the teachers or the tutors would provide instruction for approximately 3 hours per day. That's what they're required to do. Oftentimes, they don't. And if that does not happen, you should contact an education attorney. The and what's good about the homebound instruction is that the parents do not need to instruct their child, nor do they need to develop a curriculum for the student to follow. Because remember, it's as if your child is in the school, but instead, the teachers or tutors are going to your house and providing your child the education at home. Remember, homebound instruction. To be eligible for homebound instruction, you must have the requisite medical paperwork and it must be approved by the superintendent of schools. This is commonly done in 504 plan meetings or maybe even an IEP meeting where it can come up for homebound instruction where there are literally no placements for the child. There are no appropriate placements for the child. So the district and the parent agree, just homebound instruct my child. It's a difficult pill to swallow, but oftentimes this is the best option. Now, again, you may not want to do the homebound instruction if you want to take the obligation to teach your child yourself. Because remember, homebound instruction is when the district provides your child the instruction at your home. Homeschooling is when you or a family member or somebody else teaches your child. They are two different things. But homebound instruction may be the most appropriate for some kids in most circumstances. We're going to move on. Now, how do you homeschool your child? What are the steps you have to take? The first step you have to take is that you must provide written notice to the superintendent of your intention to homeschool your child. You must provide written notice of your decision. Now, what do you mean by written notice, Nick? Do I have to write something down? No, send an email. Simply email your district superintendent. Nick, who's my superintendent? Go on Google. Google your school district, Google school district superintendent. The website will appear. It'll be a big photo of them. Underneath the photo will be their email address. Send them an email. I prefer that it be a typed out letter just so you can save the letter, but an email is fine. All you have to do is send written notice. If you call the school district's going to say, I have no idea what you're talking about. But if you put it in writing, they have to allow you to homeschool your child. Now you must give the notice annually, and you must deliver the prior notice by July 1st of each school year. So if you're deciding to homeschool your child for the 24-25 school year, you have to do it before July 1st, 2024. You must do it. Now, if the homeschooling begins the middle of the school year, the notice must be provided within 14 days of beginning of the homeschooling. But it's always better to do it before the school year starts for a multitude of reasons. A, it allows you time to figure everything out. If you're going to provide the notice by July 1st, you have from July 1st till the start of the next school year to figure out your plan. Also, if you take your child out of school middle way through the school year, it may be difficult for your child to adapt. But let's say you start having the conversation now that you want to homeschool your child. You get them mentally prepared to be homeschooled. Now, there are certain circumstances where you have to take your child out, and that's, of course, the exception to the rule. But our advice would be to do it at the beginning of the school year to give yourself time to figure everything out, but also to allow your child to acclimate to the idea of being homeschooled. Now, after you do this, the school district will then provide you a copy of a home instruction regulations and an individualized home instruction plan form to complete. It's a pretty long form. You fill it out. You fill it out, you sign it, you scan it, you send it back to the superintendent. Now you must identify, develop, and implement the curriculum for all required subject areas. Now, again, this is where you have to look at your schedule. A, do you have the appropriate schedule to do this? B, do you have the appropriate knowledge to do this? Sivan and I were attorneys. I don't think I can teach eighth grade math. I don't think I can teach eighth grade science. I'll admit, if I was going to homeschool my child, I don't know if I can do it in those subjects. So you have to be honest with yourself. Now, there are programs that obviously we cannot endorse a specific one, but there are programs and courses that just give you the information. And all you have to do is pull it up on your child's computer and they can get homeschooled that way. That is also an option. There are certain programs geared towards New York State, and there are some geared towards New York City. So definitely look into that. Obviously, we cannot endorse a specific one. Okay. But regardless, you have to identify, develop, and implement the curriculum. That's usually the most difficult part about this. It can be pretty lengthy, and depending on your district, this is where they may break your chops a bit as to whether the curriculum is sufficient or not. So we're going to move on. Now, what is included in the individualized home instruction plan? So let's go over the timeline. You watch the webinar, you take our advice, you send the written notice of intent to homeschool. Oh, Nick told me to email. I'm going to email them. And then voila, you receive this individualized home instruction plan. On here is going to be your child's name. It's going to be your child's age. It's going to be your child's grade level. These are pretty much the basic in and outs of your child. There will also be a list of the syllabi for each subject, curriculum, materials, textbooks, and plans for instruction for each required subject. The district gives this to you. It's your job to take this, run with it, and show the district what you're going to do with it. Now, there will also be quarterly reports that you have to fill out. There will be dates of where you have to fill out these quarterly reports. Now, the district will provide you the quarterly reports. You just have to fill them out. Now, there will also be there will be the list of who's going to provide the instruction and a statement that the student will meet the required educational requirements for a student of equivalent age and grade level. This is just the plan that's going to be in place for your child to be homeschooled. This is very critical that this is followed by you and by the district. So we're going to move on to the next slide.
Sorry, before we move on, I just do want to clarify one thing.
Sure.
In the individualized home instruction plan, it's actually the parent who has to develop the syllabi for each subject, the curriculum materials, the textbooks, and what the plan of instruction is for each subject. So all of those documents need to be provided to the district so that they can review your intended plan of curriculum for the student for the entire year. So this is a point that definitely turns some people off to this process because it's such an extensive list that you have to do for each required subject that a child has to take in school. So aside from just the English, math, science that we're talking about, you also have to develop a curriculum for art classes, for PE classes, things like that. So all of that, everything on this list that you see on this slide is actually intended for the parent to fill out and include in the home instruction plan that the district then gets to review and approve or disapprove of, ask for edits, things like that.
Thank you. I must have misspoke, not realize I got something wrong, and then just ran with it. So I apologize.
Yeah, no problem.
So thank you, Sivan. So we're going to move on to the next slide. We're already here. So what else is required for the homeschooling? The regulations list the required courses for students depending on their grade and the age level. Each student's class grade will have different courses that are required. Now, the other critical part here is that attendance records must be kept and absences are permitted to the same standard as the local school district. Just because your child's being homeschooled does not mean that your child can just skip class whenever they want, or they do not have the same attendance requirements as students within the school district. Now, the quarterly reports must be kept and submitted to the school district. Now, these include the number of hours of instruction during the quarter, how long you're teaching your child for, the descriptions of all material covered in each subject matter. You know, in history, we covered XYZ, and a grade or written narrative for each subject, and a written explanation if less than 80% of the individualized home instruction plan was implemented. Now, you also must do the annual assessments, and these must take place from one of the standardized tests listed in the regulations and must be administered in compliance with the regulations. Now, Sivan, do you have anything to add with this slide?
Yeah, sure. So I will just add for the annual assessments that have to take place. They are required to take place either at a public school by professional staff at the school. So you would think in the same setting as the rest of same age peers are taking that standardized test. It could happen at a registered non-public school by its professional staff, but that needs to come from consent of the chief school officer. So that would be that non-public school's chief school officer that approves that. It can also take place at a non-registered non-public school by professional staff, and that has to come from consent of the superintendent. And lastly, it can also happen at the parent's home with a New York State certified teacher or other qualified person. That also requires consent of the superintendent. And that would be for situations, you know, where your child really cannot attend physically to take this exam. And I believe that it would require the parent to also locate the certified teacher or qualified person to conduct the assessment. So I did just want to add that extra hurdle.
Great. So Taylor, we can move on to the next slide. So the individualized home instruction plan, what are the procedures? So within 4 weeks of you receiving the individualized home instruction plan, you must submit a completed form to the school district. Then within 10 days thereafter, the district must inform you whether the form complies with the legal requirements. If it does not, the district must provide written notice to you of the deficiencies. If there are deficiencies, you then have 15 days to correct them. Within 15 days, the superintendent must then inform you whether the revised form complies with the requirements. If the superintendent says no, you may then appeal that decision to the Commissioner of Education within 30 days of the decision. So you get it, you fill it out, you send it to the district looks at it, tells you there's something wrong, you then have to fix it. The district then has the final say. If you disagree with that, you have an appeal right. Now, with the appeal to the Commissioner of Education, it is advised that you consult with an education attorney to look into what your options for that, whether it's worthwhile to proceed with the appeal, whether there is just another thing you can do to amend it, because these appeals to the commissioner have very strict procedural requirements. And it's critical that they be followed to the T. Now we're going to move on. Now, if you recall early on, I said one of the reasons why you may elect to homeschool your child is because your child has a very unique learning disability, and you feel that just simply cannot be provided or cared for in the school setting. So, what do you do about that? Under the education law, a homeschooled student with a disability may be entitled to their special education services through an individualized educational services plan, an IESP. When does this come up? If you're homeschooling your child, but your child is required to receive speech language therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy, you would request an IESP so that those services can be provided at your home. Now, the student must have an approved individualized home instruction plan to be eligible for the IESP. And then the Committee on Special Education must then develop the IESP for the student and consider your decision to homeschool your child. Now, your request for the IESP must be done in writing by June 1st of this before the next school year. So if you want to do it for 24-25 and your child has services that they need, you got to file this before June 1st, which means not only do you have to get the individualized home instruction plan approved, but you also have to do the request for the IESP and get the IESP done by June 1st. So it's critical that you evaluate your timeline to make sure you can get all this done by June 1st is really what you're looking at if your child needs the special education services. Now, the location of services is decided by the Board of Education, but it's often provided at the site of the homeschool. So what parents will do is when it's time for speech language therapy, the parent will just drive the student to the school to get speech language services. Oftentimes, school districts will just provide the special transportation to and from the home. Maybe it'll be a different provider location. Sometimes the providers will come to your home. But if your child needs special education services, it is critical that you develop an IESP for your child. Now we're going to move on. Now, a little bit more about IESPs. The IESP is extremely similar to the IEP, and it provides special education services for students in their homeschooling. An IESP, like an IEP, needs to be reviewed annually. So if you plan on homeschooling your child for the duration of their academic career, every single year, the IESP must be evaluated. Now, the services that are provided by the IESP are related services, the special education teacher support services. It could be the transportation. If your child's entitled to special transportation services under the IEP, your child will most likely get it under the IESP. And these services are required to accommodate your child's unique needs. Now, a good question may be, Nick, why do I need an IESP if I have an IEP? I'll explain why. When you homeschool your child, you are unenrolling your child from the school district. You're saying, even though I live here, I am unenrolling my child from the school district. So when you unenroll your child from the school district has no obligation to implement the IEP for your child. That's where the IESP comes in, right? So when you unenroll your child from the district, you get your child the IESP. Now, the IESP should pretty much just copy and paste from the IEP as to what's going to be provided. It should just be a copy and paste procedure, but oftentimes you'll see school districts try to chip away at the services. If you feel like that's happening, it's best that you call an education attorney so they can advocate and defend your child's rights. But I cannot stress this enough. If your child has an IEP and your child is going to be homeschooled, you need to get an IESP for your child. Now, just to clarify, if your child is being homebound instructed, meaning they are still within the district, but they're just being taught at your home, you do not need an IESP because your child is still enrolled in the district. Remember, the IESP only comes into play when you're homeschooling your child, not when your child is being homebound instructed. Now we are going to move on to the conclusion. Now, homeschooling your child can be highly beneficial if they have a learning disability or have school avoidance, or there is some other reason that precludes them from learning in the traditional school environment. It can also be beneficial for students and families that want to explore learning in a different way. Homeschooling is a serious commitment and requires very meticulous planning, organization, and time. We highly recommend reviewing all options at your disposal before determining which educational setting is best for your child. And remember, mom and dad, guardian, you are the leading expert on your child. Once you review all your options, only you will know if homeschooling is appropriate for your child. And if it is, you should proceed it. Just know that there are many steps you have to take and there are regulations that you have to follow. And if you have any questions about the homeschooling process, here at Tully Rinckey, we're more than happy to help you explain that procedure to you, or you should confer with another qualified education attorney. And that concludes the webinar. We will now take questions.
Okay, let's take a look. So what to do about end of year assessments and how to request if you pulled your child out after the third quarter. So end of year assessments, I'm assuming means the standardized testing that all students are taking. So as we covered in the webinar, the standardized tests that students are required to take need to be conducted in one of the four situations that we had available. So it either takes place in the child's public school along with all the other students, or it can take place in a non-public school setting, but that would require consent of either the chief of office at the school or at a non-public school setting with consent of the superintendent. There are some situations in which this can happen in your home as well, but that would require a certified teacher or another qualified person to come into the home and actually conduct the standardized test for the student. And so the second part of that question on how to request if you pulled out your child after the third quarter, it would be fine to go forward with homeschooling if you pulled your child out at the third quarter or afterwards, as long as you provide that notice, as we discussed, within that 14 days of beginning homeschooling. So if you'll remember from that slide that we had on earlier, it's either that you provide the notice by July 1st of the school year beforehand, or you provide 14 days notice from when you actually pull your child out of school and begin the homeschooling. So I believe that you still need to have the approved individualized home instruction plan before you can actually pull your child out of school. But once you have that plan, I think you can provide that 14 days notice and just begin the instruction. If you pulled your child out of school before the end of the school year, so if you did it today and had about 2 months left of school, you would have to just develop an individualized home instruction plan for the remaining portion of the school year. So that would be about 2 months. You would take into consideration everything your child has done up to this point, and then look at the remainder of the curriculum, and you would have to implement that. So that would also include those annual assessments that take place at the end of the school year. But otherwise, it should be fine to do within that 14 days notice.
Well, thank you everyone for joining today's webinar, and thank you both Nick and Sivan for presenting. This presentation was recorded and a copy will be sent to all the attendees later this week. I hope everyone has a good rest of their night.
Thank you.